Good evening. Thank you to those who are watching at home. Our city clerk has an announcement to make before the meeting starts.
Pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order N-2920, issued by Governor Newsom on March 17, 2020, the regular meeting of the City Council for April 28, 2020, will be conducted telephonically through Zoom and broadcast live on the city's website and Channel 3. Please note the council chamber will not be open to the public. If you would like to speak on an agenda item, you can access the meeting by dialing the following telephone number, and you will be placed in the waiting room, muted until it is your turn to speak. Please dial *67, which will hide your telephone number, then 1-669-900-9128. Enter meeting ID number 997-1308-6742, and the password is 481010. The city wants you to know that you can also submit your comments by email to ccpubliccomment@grandterrace-ca.gov. The City of Grand Terrace thanks you in advance for taking all precautions to prevent spreading the COVID-19 virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. All right, so it says here I need to convene the regular meeting, but it's being conducted in a very irregular fashion. However, I will convene the regular meeting of the City Council of the City of Grand Terrace for Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. If you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam City Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Councilmember Allen,
Present.
Councilmember Hussey,
Present.
Councilmember Robles, present. Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
I am here.
Mayor McNabeau.
Present.
Madam Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. This time we will recess to closed session. We have one item of business, which is conference with labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6. Agency designated representatives include G. Harold Duffy, City Manager, Cynthia Fortune, Assistant City Manager, Adrian Guerra, City Attorney, Colin Tanner, Deputy City Attorney. Employee organization is Teamsters Local 1932. Unrepresented employees include City Manager, Assistant City Manager, City Clerk, Director of Public Works, Director of Planning and Development Services, Management Analyst, of which there are 2, and an Assistant Planner. So at this time, we will recess to closed session. Met in closed session. Council met in closed session, conference with labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54957.6. Agency designated representatives include G. Harold Duffy, City Manager, Cynthia Fortune, Assistant City Manager, Adrian Guerra, City Attorney, Colin Tanner, Deputy City Attorney. Employee organization, Teamsters Local 1932. Unrepresented employees include City Manager, Assistant City Manager, City Clerk, Director of Public Works, Director of Planning and Development Services, Management Analyst, 2 positions, and Assistant Planner. There were no reportable actions coming out of closed session. So back to our regular agenda. We have no special presentations tonight. Do we have any need to reorder, add to, or remove items from the agenda?
Yes, Mayor. We need to move item 13 ahead of item 12.
Okay. So we'll take item 13 before item 12. Any others?
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So the next is our consent calendar, which is considered to be routine and non-controversial. The consent calendar will be acted upon by City Council at one time without any discussion. Any council member, staff member, or citizen may request removal of an item from the consent calendar for discussion. Are there any requests to remove an item from the consent calendar?
No, Madam Mayor.
Looks like Mr. Hussey didn't return with us, or can I just not see him?
I'm here.
There he is. All right. So seeing no request to remove items, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Mayor, I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
So motion by Councilmember Allen, second by Councilmember Robles. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey,
Yes.
Councilmember Robles,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
Looks like he said yes, but I can't hear him because he's muted.
you're unmuted, Mayor Pro Tem. Madam Mayor.
Sorry. Aye.
Here, aye. Aye.
Motion passes unanimously with council members Allen, Hussey, and Robles voting yes, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson voting yes, and Mayor McNamara voting yes.
Thank you. Do we have any requests for public comment at this time?
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so I'll come back to council for their communications. We'll begin with Councilmember Jeff Allen.
Okay, so what am I speaking into, Madam Clerk? The microphone or the computer?
Microphone.
The microphone, okay. So I don't need to turn this on? All right. Well, I have nothing to report, Madam Mayor, except that we're staying healthy and trying to abide by the states and counties' directives, and I applaud all of those out there who are able to do that and those who are taking all the precautions they can to help flatten this curve and get us through this. And I thank you for doing that and ask you to continue with that. And that's all, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Councilmember Bill Hussey.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Just one item. I'm on the community cabinet and I'm having people contact me for graduations. We all know that the graduations are coming up and stuff for our high school. And I've been on a couple emails and people asking, can the city do anything for to recognize the seniors who graduate? And I know there's a lot of things going on, but I was wondering if, I should I don't know if I put on the agenda or what, but ask, if we could idolize our Channel 3 and our website just to highlight the seniors graduating, have their senior picture, and, maybe a short congratulations, from their parents or something. But something for these kids to be recognized for all the hard work they did throughout their school tenure. That was just a concern that the residents are having, and like I said, I'm on the community cabinet with Colton Joint Unified, and they're asking me about it. I don't know what I heard that the Colton Joint Unified might have the graduation in July, or I heard it might be next year, or they're gonna do like their own virtual graduation where the kids walk across the stage and they record one at a time. So I know that's still up in the air, but this is something maybe the council can consider it and our city manager can do it. And I don't think it'd be any staff hours in there, but I just like to bring that up. Sorry I didn't bring it up on agenda, but that's just something that came up. But besides that, I wish everybody well and stay safe. And my prayers are with the city of Grand Terrace and the residents and staff. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Hussey. Councilmember Sylvia Robles.
Thank you, Mayor. I did attend a couple of webinars. One was with the Council of Foreign Relations that's sponsored by the White House. They had a woman from J.P. Morgan Chase Institute, and the discussion was supposed to be on the payroll payment protection plan, but they had run out of money. But it was a very interesting thing. They had some information that they have done modeling before under Hurricane Irma, Harvey, where businesses were wiped out. But this one they're saying is different, that we should expect this to probably be worse than the years of the Great Recession, beginning in the years 2012. The key thing that was interesting to me that would, for the locally and for the state, is that small business typically only have 15 days of reserves. So, and they're not getting help. So it's a very difficult thing that'll affect us in our sales tax for sure, and greater issues for the state. Also listened to the League of Cities on the fiscal outlook. There was a lot of information, it was very helpful. One of the things that's important is because property taxes have already been paid for April, and Michael Coleman is not expecting to have any issues yet for the next drawdown in December. The issues for us is our sales tax, and for other cities, transit occupancy taxes. And the other thing that was interesting was on Senate Bill 1 for the roads that's going to be impacted because the gas prices have gone down so much and consumption is low. So there's some serious impacts. These have all been very helpful for what gearing up for what we're going to have to face in decision making for the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Robles. Councilmember Allen, you said you had something that you needed to add?
Oh, thanks, Mayor. This past week, I received an email from one of the residents, and this resident was expressing some concerns that they had and some issues they were having with their neighbor. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the resident doesn't feel like we're being attentive enough to their concerns and being responsive enough. And I would like to let that resident know publicly, and all the residents know, that if you contact one of the council members, like myself, you'll receive a response and you'll receive some action of some sort. I want to just let the residents know that, you know, we're under a lot more stress and pressure right now for things, but we still want to make sure that we observe our codes and regulations, and also to do the neighborly thing and to be neighbors. And there's no reason that one neighbor should be afraid or scared for their safety from their other neighbors. So with that said, let's all look out for each other and have each other's back. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember. Mayor Pro Tem Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. I have been monitoring also the various emails and texts and different pieces of information that we've received to review and to be involved in. I think there's no question about the fact that we are going to be financially impacted by what's taking place, and it's really a 6 to 8 month window that the immediate impacts us. I think what I'm concerned about is that a lot of folks are looking at the bleakest view, and I know, for example, City of San Bernardino about 10 days ago finally opened up their plan, check, and permit process, which they had closed down completely. Now what they're doing is they're accepting things through the mail, and then with their limited staff, processing stuff, and then of course they have consultant plan checkers and people that do the processing. If it's slower, it probably is. If you have to think ahead, it probably does take that. But I think we can still get some business done. And I'd like to think as things start to rise out of the ashes, that we will need to be scalpel oriented in the way that we implement our business attitudes, the way we do business, the way we help business, and to move forward into a full-fledged circumstance. I don't think we can just expect somebody else to kind of take care of it, or the business just to take care of it, or whatever. After all, the government has reacted, and rightfully so, to a biological emergency. But it is going to be up to us at a local level to help lead our businesses out of this morass. So I think it's going to take some brainstorming. That's all I've got, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The one item I want to talk about is a conference call with mayors with the Board of Supervisor Chair Kurt Hagman. There's a weekly call where he is giving us updates on where the county is with regard to perhaps opening in stages. And so it started with the description of how many cases and how many members of our county had passed away. And then he got into the performing of 18,000 tests at this point, and they are ramping up their tests. They are looking to test 4,000 to 5,000 per week now. So they really are bringing in the number of tests. So daily, Monday through Friday at Arrowhead Regional, there is testing. SAC Health Systems, if you're an IEHP member, you can go there Monday through Friday. And then the County Public Health Department is doing pop-ups, and I think our city manager is working on getting one here locally. So the dailies are Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, I believe. They might be a little bit earlier than that. So they are looking at an active task force to view the way that we can, as a county, come out of this. They are also going to be selecting nursing facilities and high-risk senior centers to go and do some intense testing of those sites. They will show, the county will show up and do testing there. Later this week, they are planning to deploy antibody tests. So these are the ones that should show whether somebody has had COVID-19 and recovered from the disease. They also will be rolling out a voluntary anonymous app that will help them to do contact tracing. It will be something that somebody can opt into if they want, and they can opt out at any time. So as we know, the county has loosened up their stay-at-home orders for passive recreation. A number of the hiking areas are open. A number of the golf courses are open with strict guidelines. And so I think at this point, our city could look at maybe some of the parks loosening up. I know we had plans towards the end of the month, and so I imagine the city manager might talk about that later. Of course, the encouragement to adhere to face masks and hygiene rules when you are out in public and keeping distance. City managers also should be receiving a survey tomorrow that will ask for what the city's needs are with respect to financial assistance from the county. The county has currently received money, and they are using it for the operations that they have that are COVID related, but they will be sending a survey to the city managers asking what COVID related costs that perhaps they need help with. So that might be a good opportunity. They know that there will be more coming from the Treasury, but they don't know what that looks like. Right now, a lot of the money that they have is restricted to healthcare related or COVID related. They are also looking at the idea that FEMA is going to be in a position to help local governments, especially with meals for those that are aging or considered seniors, so 65 plus, those that have been exposed to or have COVID-19, those that live alone that are 65 plus or live with somebody else that's 65 years old or older, and those that are below the poverty level. And there's a percentage of funding in place from today through May 10th for that. Not sure how to apply for that, but I think the county probably has information. And what they're looking at with that, it would be purchasing from local restaurants in order to feed those that qualify in the community. Now, when they talk to the governor about criteria for opening up, and there are 4 stages that they have come up with. And the first one, we've started as a county, the safety preparedness, the building out of testing and personal protection equipment and hospitalization. We have to have a certain amount of hospitals ready to go. We have to have essential workplace safety, and we have to look at sector by sector safe reopening. Further, there was a discussion about the opportunity to purchase through the county's purchasing. They're going to be looking at bulk buying of protective gear. And so if cities want to call purchasing at the county and make a purchase through their bulk buying, there's an opportunity to maybe get items that are hard to find, but also to get a better price on it because it will be bulk buying. The stage number 2 they're looking at is lower risk workplaces, and this is where retail establishments that aren't considered essential have an opportunity to come back online. Unfortunately, the timeline that they're saying is another couple of weeks, but I'm really pressing that they start looking at the ways that other retail establishments could operate in the way that our supermarkets are operating, with the masks, with the protective gear, with the distancing, with the shields. And so there's more to come on that, but I believe that we really need to focus on ways that we can, in our city, survey our businesses, and I believe the city manager did that. We need to get that information to the county so that they understand what industries we have in our city and ways that we believe that we can help them to open. And I think that that's really incumbent upon us to find safe ways for us to open our businesses, because each city is distinct, just as each county in the state is distinct. And so I will end right there. Hopefully we have some better news. But the one thing I will say that's very exciting to me is that we have nice, smooth pavement on Barton Road associated with our interchange. And so I'm looking for things to celebrate, and that's a wonderful thing to celebrate at this time. So we'll move on with public hearings. We have none. Unfinished business, we have none. And so we'll move on to new business. Item number 7, COVID-19 update and impacts of local emergency. Mr. City Manager, is that yours?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Mayor. For the record, G. Harold Duffy, City Manager. Over the last 2 months, the city has modified its operations and our services to seniors, parks, and libraries and development projects have been impacted by COVID-19. But I think it's now time for us to talk about a transition into reopening some of our facilities. So one of the first things we're going to be doing is we'll be opening up a couple parks in the city, Richard Rollins Park and Fitness Park. And these 2 parks were selected because they are good for passive activities. There's a walking trail at Richard Rollins Park. There's also a walking and exercise trail at the Fitness Park. They will be opening on May 7th, 2020, and there will be some restrictions, of course, when those parks open. We'll go over those very quickly. So Richard Rollins and Fitness Park, they're opening under the following conditions. The pedestrian gates will open and from dawn to dusk. Residents should practice social distancing with non-family members. Masks should be worn in the park. Several hand washing stations will be placed around the walking trails. The facilities will remain closed at the parks. The restrooms, the swings, and the playground equipment, the gazebos will remain closed. Parking lots, fields for organized team sports, practice or games, but family members of the same household can actually play together in those activities. The important thing is that this is really sort of an honor system. If we find that there are community gatherings and people are not practicing realistic social distancing, we'll have no other choice but to reclose the parks and try to reopen them with different strategies. These parks actually will remain closed. Veterans Freedom Park and our dog park. As we try to practice or try to determine how to best implement social distancing for these particular parks, these parks are built on recreational activities and community activities. For example, if we look at the dog park has 14 different benches and 8 different picnic tables. And while the dogs run around and do their activities, people socialize together in those local places. So we're trying to find a way to try to look at trying to integrate those back into the system and also practicing safe social distancing. And also at Veterans Freedom Park, we have the basketball courts, baseball diamonds, playground equipment. And so we're trying to make sure that, once again, we come up with a strategy. So we're going to gradually ease into opening up the parks. And so these parks will remain closed because of the playground equipment, the restrooms, and the dog parks and playground fields. Other programs that are impacted, our library has been closed for a while, and we're still working with the county to see when that's going to reopen. And City Hall, our lobbies is closed. We never closed operations, so we're still been doing inspections of projects, taking in new projects, servicing our parks, doing street maintenance. So we have not closed down completely at City Hall. Also, the mayor mentioned earlier, starting on May 7th at the Azure Hills Church, we'll be having our first drive-up testing program. What will happen is on Tuesday, the county public health will open up their website to allow people to schedule an appointment to get the COVID-19 testing. They anticipate 400 to 600 appointments and servicing about 500 people on that particular day. So residents can go to that spot there. It's a tiny URL at the bottom there. The actual drive-up will open from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we are working very closely with County Public Health, who will be presenting the program. We want to thank Azure Hills Church for volunteering to host the site. We've been in contact with the sheriff and the fire department in the implementation of this particular program. So with that, Mayor, I'm available for any questions the council might have.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Are there questions of staff at this time? I have 2 questions. I understand that we have been canceling our planning commission sessions. Is that delaying any of our projects that could go forward?
I don't believe so, Mayor, at this time. One of the important components of a planning process is that ability for the public to come out and engage in the process. And so we have some projects that are in line and ready to be heard by the public. But one of the concerns that a lot of cities are having is because of our restrictions because of COVID-19, we want to ensure that the public has the right to contribute and have access. And so we're delaying some of those public sessions because we want to make sure that when we have the public sessions for the public to comment, that they have access and the availability to do so.
Okay. And so we're going to have to wait until we ease restrictions for gathering in order for us to have those meetings start again?
Well, for some of the meetings that require a public hearing, yes, but we are still looking at having planning commission meetings. But for those meetings that are agenda specific, where it requires a public hearing, we're looking at delaying those decisions.
Okay. And then as far as the dog park, is there any way to set up an appointment session for residents so that maybe like two could use it at a time, or some other way of opening it up for a short amount of time?
So
Or
we
is
are,
that would be very labor intensive on staff, I imagine, though?
well, one of the things we do have park volunteers. So we're reaching out to the park volunteers to see if we can schedule something like that, where we can get, a couple people on the small dog side, a couple of people on the large dog side, have them go in and do a 30-minute session. The dogs are running and then come out. So we're looking at ways to try to work on that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Allen? And then Mayor Pro Tem Wilson.
So, hey, Mr. Duffy, there's a few other smaller, like really small parks around town. There's one over on Raven that has a little bit of playground equipment in it, and there's, ones like these. Are those going to remain closed, or is that equipment going to be remain taped off, or are we going to untape them?
Sorry. On those small parks, we at best should be posting that not to play on the playground equipment. They're in an area where there's no gates. So and for example, Griffith Park is more of a passive park where people just kind of walk through. The TJ Austin Park does have some playground equipment there. If we haven't taped that off, we should be posting signs there saying, please don't use the equipment for sanitary reasons.
Are we going to keep the equipment at Rollins and Fitness Park taped off?
We are going to be putting notices out and taping the area off, the gazebos and the playground equipment.
Okay, so it's just the open areas basically available, right?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I have a question about the antibody tests. I know what we've seen in the past is kind of a conglomerate of testing results, and at this juncture, we're like 15 or 16, cases in the city of Grand Terrace. We don't know where they come from. We don't know where to be concerned about. My understanding is the sheriff's department does know that information, but it seems to me that it would be important for the city manager to know that information so that we can make intelligent decisions on how we, again, scalpel our way through the startup on some of these businesses. What I'm concerned about is that once we do this testing on the 7th of May, are we, my understanding is that the test facility will be open to everybody, but they'll be by appointment. Will they be able to somehow partition the results of these things so that we know really we can start to form a consensus on what we have as far as prior survival rate, as well as, current cases and so on that are partitioned specifically by Grand Terrace? Third question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So one of the things that I think that the public health department is doing now, which is very important, is they've released the total number of tests that have been taken in the city. So they listed by jurisdiction now. Before, we just had a number of who had tested positive. But the number by itself doesn't really mean anything if you don't know what the sample was. And so they're providing more information. And so my understanding is that once we get the information on, say, we get 600 more tests for the general area, and anyone in the region can come to the test that we're going to be having in Grand Terrace, and so then the public health will take that data, and we are in contact with public health on a regular basis. And so if there is a particular area or a hotbed for outbreak, public health would then come in and provide that information. They do provide the information to our first responders, to the fire department, and to the sheriff's department. I will certainly ask them if the data shows, if, for example, we have 400 tests, and if we're seeing an increase in positives, and we're looking at, we can certainly ask, are there certain areas of the city where those tests are showing positives? And that would give us some indication in terms of what we need to do in terms of asking for additional help from public health.
They give us better tools to work with and experience dictates that if they know that they have to separate things out as they're going in, it's a whole lot easier than trying to take it apart after the fact, which is what we're doing with the tracing. So, you know, it would seem that that might help us a lot because we only have weeks, not, you know, months and years. So the other thing I wanted to know, and I guess just out of my own curiosity, and that is what happened to the soccer fields? Who's maintaining those?
Well,
Poured a lot of money into them, and they look like the Wild West.
Well, I think what you're seeing is you're seeing that the school district's staff, their maintenance staff has been impacted by their operations, or they're not maintaining it like they normally would. And, you know, that's kind of one of the frustrating things for our residents. They're looking at our parks, and our parks are still very well maintained. And the smart move about that, it really is, it's going to take a lot of effort and time and money to get those fields returned back to where they were just replanted about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Didn't we have some kind of language in our agreement when we put these things in so far as their maintenance of the parks? And because I can't, you know, I'm one of those type of people who looks at it as that if it doesn't say that they're off the hook, then they're not off the hook, regardless of an emergency.
So what our agreement says, and we have to remember that the fields belong to the school district. What our agreement says that if our soccer leagues want to improve the condition of the field, that they couldn't do it themselves, that we would hire someone and they would compensate us for that. So in this particular case, the owner of the field is the school district, and the school district is the one who's not maintaining the field at this time to its previous condition.
Bill, that sounds like that's in your bailiwick. Is there any way we can have a conversation with them?
I can certainly
In
talk
other words,
to
it doesn't become a unilateral kind of decision. We both own something.
I can talk to the superintendent and get his read in terms of when they're going to be returning to normal service.
Amen. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Sylvia Robles.
Yeah, I just kind of have some comments. I'm reading on Twitter a bunch of other entities and on the newspaper, for example, opening public beaches. It's going to the governing board. And here, you're using your emergency powers, I guess, to decide independently what parks we open, keep closed, how we phase them in. Because my thinking would be, we know that COVID under hot weather, you know, less than a minute, is gonna die. So we're gonna have playground equipment taped up, and we're saying practice social distancing, and we have hand wash stations. So if I'm a parent, my thinking is, well, I can figure out if there's 2 kids on the swing, you know, I don't put my kid on the swing, and the children wash their hands after. So I'm kind of thinking these are possibly a little heavy-handed. Again, with dogs, you know, so there's park benches. If a person's at one park bench and they're talking to a person at a park bench that's 12 feet away, because they're not close together, you know, I would rather that we, because we're saying we're gonna enforce if the need be, if we observe. So it seems like we can observe and at all the parks, all the facilities, and then enforce if need be. But I just see that this is kind of gonna cause some bad feelings, and maybe we see if the bad feelings happen, and then you can adjust.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we're doing is, and so there's the 24 city managers in the San Bernardino County area. We're having these conversations about, you know, the city parks, and we have public health saying what they were saying you can and cannot do. And so we are looking at best practices. And so before I moved forward with opening those 2 parks, I sent our strategy to the public health. And I said, if we do this, do you have any concerns about it? And they came back saying, well, no, you're fine. Just make sure that you section off the playground equipment. And so I agree with you. We have to develop a strategy to reopen our activities. And so this was the first phase in terms of a passive parks. As I'm looking on a constant basis with what other cities are doing and how they're doing it, and certainly if the council wants to have the item brought back into looking at all of our facilities, I can certainly bring that back as soon as possible. But I thought because we have these two parks that are built around passive activities, that they would be natural to open.
Further questions? Okay.
I do, Mayor.
Oh, Councilmember Hussey.
Mr. Duffy, can you post that Azure Hills overhead back again? Because I'm trying to read it and it looked blurry to me, the
Sure.
website.
And so what I will do is I will post that online first thing in the morning, and we'll get that out there. We'll put that on our Facebook page, our web page. We'll send out a newsletter also, so we'll get that information out to everyone.
Okay, is it blurry on your end? Because I'm looking also at the TV and that website was blurry over here on Channel 3. Information on it?
It's tiny.
And so we'll put it online, and we'll also, in our Facebook post, we also list the place where they can just click on it and go directly to the site.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this is a receive and file, so I'll make a motion to receive and file.
Second.
Please vote. Oh, please
Councilmember Allen?
Please call the vote.
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey?
Yes.
Councilmember Robles?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson? Could you repeat, please?
Sure. Somebody muted. Aye.
Mayor McNabo?
Yes,
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. Item number 8 is the first amendment to agreement for purchase and sale of real property and joint escrow instructions between the City of Grand Terrace and Greens Group for the sale of property located at 22317, 22273, and 22293 Barton Road. Mr. City Manager?
Mayor, the Planning and Development Director, Steve Weiss, will be presenting this report, and he and I will be available for questions after the report is presented.
Okay.
Mr. Weiss?
We need to be unmuted by the host.
You are unmuted. Please commence with your presentation.
Thank you. Let me just get this open here. Thank you, Mayor and council members, Mr. City Manager and City Attorney. For the record, my name is Steve Weiss. I'm the Development Services Director and Planning, and also in charge of planning. The item before you is item 1.8, the Greens Group, and it's an extension of the purchase sales agreement. So to give you a little bit of, next slide, please. To give you a little bit of background, on August 13th of 2019, the City Council approved the purchase and sales agreement of real property and joint escrow instructions for 3 parcels owned by the Grand Terrace, in the City of Grand Terrace, about a little under 5 acres. Next slide, please. This is the location. You're well aware. It's near the Blue Mountain Vistas, and it's about 5 acres. Next slide, please. Just an aerial of what it will look like, what this area will look like in the future. Next slide, please. In accordance with the executed purchase sales agreement, escrow was opened with a deposit of $150,000, and concept plans were approved by the council on October 22nd of 2019. And the entitlement process needed to start 45 days after council approved concept plans. City staff and Greens have been working diligently in an effort to advance the project. Next slide, please. March of 2020, the Greens Group contacted the city to reiterate its commitment to the project, but expressed concerns as the economy began to shut down because of COVID. Next slide, please. In these unparalleled times, the Greens Group stated it needed the capital and the time extension so they would be in a good position to ensure the success of the project's future. Next slide. Greens Group requests an extension of 6 months to all due dates for the project and a reduction of the escrow funds by $100,000 to provide additional liquidity for the project. Next slide. With the extension requested by the Greens Group, the date will extend 6 months to November 12, 2020, with an anticipated closing date no later than October of 2021. Next slide, please. Under the proposal presented to the council, the current $150,000 in deposit will be allocated as follows. $100,000 will be returned from escrow to Greens to provide Greens additional liquidity for the development of the project. $15,000 will be retained in deposit and escrow, and $35,000 will be provided to the city as consideration for this amount, including the extensions, additional carrying costs, and due processing due to the delay. Next slide. The proposed amendment makes no other changes to the original purchase sales agreement, including the purchase price. Also, the reimbursement and indemnification agreement is not affected and therefore remains in effect as originally approved by the city and Greens Group. Next slide, please. To recommendation, this proposal demonstrates the Greens Group is still committed to the project and ensures the project will progress during the early phases of the region's economic recovery. Moreover, the proposal is reasonable given the economic impacts of COVID-19. Next slide. Staff recommends the City Council grant the Greens Group an extension of 6 months to all due dates for the project and a reduction of the escrow funds by $100,000 to provide additional liquidity for the project. That concludes my remarks, and I am available, as well as City Manager Duffy, for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. Questions of staff at this time? All right. Mr. Duffy, at this time, would there be a penalty if the Greens Group wanted to bow out of this project?
No, there would not, Mayor.
Okay. Further questions of staff? All right. Are there any requests to speak on this item?
I do have 2 people waiting. I'm going to go ahead and admit one.
All right, please do.
This is caller. Do we have a caller on the line?
Yes. Hello?
Hello, if you would please state your name for us and let us know what your comments are.
Sure, my name is Gabriel. I'm with TSR Construction. No comment, just present for the meeting.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for being here with us. We'll move on.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next caller.
They're just videoing. I'm sorry, there is no audio.
Okay, so we do not have a second speaker.
No, they're just viewing.
Okay, they're just viewing. Very good. Well, thank you to the viewer for being here. We'll bring it back to council for further discussions. Councilmember Allen?
Motion.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Mr. Duffy, regarding the question that the mayor asked just a minute ago, at what point will it be, would there be a penalty for bowing out? At what point would there be, or is there one at any time in the schedule?
So the escrow, I believe, is a date of November now. That would be that all the deposits remaining would stay there. One of the things that we've done is we've recrafted this agreement. The $35,000 that's being returned to the city to help expedite the improvement process, that money is basically considered ours now to fulfill the project, regardless of whether the Greens Group remains in the project or not. And so that becomes a sort of a penalty if they would decide to walk away after we approve this agreement. We're still going to use that $35,000 to process the master plan, the Barton specific plan, any other environmental documents, or any costs that we might have.
Thanks.
Any further discussion at this point?
So, I do.
Councilmember Allen?
If there's if Greens Group or say, if there's a recovery, I mean, everything in the future is just, sort of up in the air. We're trying to, second guess or hip shoot and plan for it, and I think that's great. But if somehow things aren't as bad for them as they thought they were going to be, will any of this be reversed, or will we just continue on with the 15,000 in escrow and?
So this is not going to be reversed. However, there's nothing to prohibit the Greens Group from closing on the project earlier and moving forward.
Yeah, that was going to be my next one. Okay, thanks.
All right. Any further discussion? Perhaps a motion?
Motion for approval, Mayor?
Okay, I have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem for approval,
I second it.
and a second by Councilmember Robles. Will you call the vote, please?
Councilmember Allen?
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey?
Yes.
Councilmember Robles?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor McNamara?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Move to item 9, which is award of contract for Mount Vernon Safety Project in an amount not to exceed $259,350. Alan French, Public Works Director.
Thank you, Mayor. I will be presenting for Mr. French tonight. So this is the award of construction of Mount Vernon Safety Improvement Project, Cycle 8 grant. This project consists of 5 intersections on Mount Vernon for safety improvement. We're asking to authorize revenue and expenditure appropriations in the amount of $325,000, respectively, in the Highway Safety Improvement Program, otherwise known as HISP. Funds for construction phase of Mount Vernon Avenue corridor intersections improvements for federal HISP programs L5421, parentheses 005. So the award of the construction contract to TSR Construction, and I might add that Gabriel from TSR Construction was our previous person. He's on hold in case the council might have any questions. TSR Construction is also the company that did the improvements on Preston and Barton recently. As I said before, we have 5 intersections that are actually being completed. There were 3 bids received. Bid 1 was, the successful bidder was $259,350. The next closest bid was $312,000, and the third bid was $393,000. Note that the engineer's estimate for construction was well above the amount for the award of this contract. And so, just kind of going through these slides, in 2016, the city received the award of a grant for $435,000 to improve the safety of 5 intersections along Mount Vernon. In December 2019, Caltrans approved our estimate for the construction of the project for $325,000. This kind of is a list of the layouts of the various factors of the cost. Some of the funds that the council's already approved and we've expended was the obligations of the grant program, the preliminary engineering, and also the grant administration. The grant administration of $10,000 is still underway, and they'll help us facilitate the end of the project, along with construction management of $36,500, and then reimbursement costs for staff of $20,000. That rounds out our total of $435,500. So this is kind of if you look at these particular intersections, You're going to be seeing some safety measures at each intersection with the stripings that will occur. And just so we can be clear on this starts out all the way down on the very beginning on Mount Vernon and Grand Terrace Road. And then we move further down to DeBerry, and then we go on to Van Buren and to Pico, So in March, the project was advertised for construction, then notice of invited bids was sent to contractors with the city completed list, as well as an online bidding site. On April the 10th, the city received 3 bids, as I said earlier. The work will conclude signage and striping, additional lighting, minor paving ramps, upgrades and speed feedback signs. Also, this is one of the first projects that will be working with solar lighting at these intersections. And one of the benefits of solar lighting at the intersections, the solar lighting has improved dramatically, but there's no utility cost associated with having those facilities lit annually. So there's no utility cost for us to incur. The next steps is to submit the required paperwork, including the staff report and contracts to the state so they can issue the notice to proceed. So we anticipate that once we get the notice to proceed in about 2 weeks, we anticipate the project starting within 60 days, and by July the 12th or mid-July, the project would be completed. And this is just some identifications of what our stop signs will look like and flashing signs, oversized stop signs at this location, and flashing stop signs will also be included. Staff is recommending that the council approve the revenues and expense appropriation as shown in the staff report. Staff is recommending that the council approve the award of the construction agreement to TSR Construction and Inspection in the amount of not to exceed $259,350. And with that, I'm available for any questions along with TSR.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Questions of staff at this time? Councilmember Allen?
But will the difference between the 259 and the 435 go, is it going to be used, or will we lose it, or?
No, and so if we go back to the overall cost, there was a breakdown there.
Yeah, I see on page 159, but I see it on your slide too.
So we won't, we can't retain the money that we don't use. And the initial estimate of 325 was the construction component, so this was considerably lower. But there may be some things that we can do to improve the different sites, and we'll look at those to make sure that that we can modify the grant to ask for additional resources within the awarded amount.
Great, thanks.
Is there an opportunity to look at a traffic light at Mount Vernon and Grand Terrace Road? I don't know if it warrants it, and I don't know if that would fit within the expense.
I don't know that it would. We can certainly ask, but the amount for traffic light far exceeds, I think, the remaining balance of this. But we can certainly look at that.
Okay, and that raises your cost for electricity if you do that. All right. Councilmember Hussey, did you have a question?
Yes, on that, I like the traffic light idea, Mayor. Can we put our blue light cameras on those intersections if we have extra funds? So that way if somebody does have an accident or something happens, because I know one of those intersections, somebody got hit by a car, and I guess the neighbor's camera actually caught it and helped verify what was going on.
So we can certainly ask the state about that, because, this is a safety improvement, and when people see cameras, they seem to operate a little differently than sometimes they wouldn't. So we can certainly ask. We'll have Mr. French go back and ask the state if we can modify the grant to include some cameras at the various intersections.
I think Mayor Pro Tem has a question.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Oh, just to note that usually if, and I know the city manager knows this, usually traffic lights are between $160,000 and $250,000 a piece. So that's why it pumps it over. But I did have, I guess, one question. and I guess it's about the bidding process itself. When you have a substantial difference from one to the other, was there any scuttlebutt amongst the contractors? Because they always like to tell on each other of any exposure we might have to be able to punch up our contingency.
Well, you know, one of the things that did occur in this process, there was a challenge to the low bid, and we looked at that along with our grants administrator. So we did review that. We've gone through the bids to make sure that the requirements are all being met. And so I think the one challenge had nothing really to do with the work, but it was the requirement to have a certain striping license. The contractor had a striping license. The successful bidder had the license, but there was a challenge in terms of the type of license. But our grant administrator looked at that and found that that was not a challenge that would throw out the cost of the bid. And so we're very confident that the award that we have will withstand any challenges.
I noted that there were some instances where, in fact, in the case of the lower bidder, they marked through any of the subcontractors that they would ordinarily identify and said not available. That scares me a little bit because I don't know that any contractor in an A license usually does their own striping, for example, and yet it appears by the way they mark that through that they're planning on doing their own. And so it's a red flag.
Well, one of the things that we have as a part of our process, if you look on this chart here on line 5, is construction management inspection. And so that construction manager is actually another engineering firm that we've hired to monitor the work of the contractor. And so it will make sure that there aren't any side steps along the process.
I hope their communication will be better than what they did with the dog park. Similar agreement, and we got hit in the tail end, and that's not good communication.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Councilmember Allen? That answers your question? Okay. Councilmember Robles, did you have a question? Okay. All right. Are there any requests to speak on this item?
No, Madam Mayor, but the call-in user, Gabriel, I believe that's TSR.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll bring it back to council for further discussion and consideration of a motion.
I just have a comment.
Councilmember Robles.
I just also want to say, this mask is making me very dizzy. I just want to compliment staff on going aggressively after grants. This is something that's, as Councilman Allen says, one of the bright points in what we're going through right now, and it's going to be enhanced the safety. I want to make sure you recognize for that.
Was there a motion in there somewhere?
Yes, I'll move the item.
Second.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Robles, second by Councilmember Allen. Please call the vote.
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey,
Yes.
Councilmember Robles,
Yes,
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
Aye.
Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move to item 10, which is a resolution and ordinance for ratification and adoption of the 2019 California Fire Code with local amendments, continued from January 28th, 2020. So technically, this is an unfinished business, but that's okay. May we have staff report, please? Is that Stephen Weiss, Planning and Development Services Director?
Do you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, thank you. There we go. Okay, thank you, Mayor McNamara and council members, city manager, and city attorney. For the record again, Steve Weiss. The item before you, 1.10, is an adoption of the 2019 California Fire Code with local amendments. Next slide, please. So every 3 years, the state of California, through the state fire marshal, amends and adopts the California Fire Code. And most recently, amendments were completed and publicized on July 1st of 1919, and local jurisdictions must enforce the state code. Next slide. The San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors, let's see, we got Alan French on there now. There's an interruption on the screen. Excuse me for the delay. The Board of Supervisors, acting as the board for the fire protection districts, considered and approved the 2019 Fire Code with local amendments for final adoption on the 28th of this year pursuant to its ordinance. When the district adopts the fire code with local amendments, the district is required to have their ordinance ratified. Ratification of the county, next slide, please. Ratification of the county code with existing chapter 15.18 of the Grand Terrace Municipal Code must be updated. Council then adopts by resolution that the council set a public hearing for May 12th of 2020 to hear input from the public prior to the proposed second reading and adoption of the 2019 Fire Code with local amendments. As a follow-up, on February 11th, 2020, this item was presented to the City Council. The council had questions regarding the county's enforcement oversight over and above the state code. This item was continued, allowing staff to respond to council questions pertaining to how the newly adopted state county fire code might affect Grand Terrace's ability to protect our best interests. Next slide, please. Next slide. You hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Let's see down.
We're on the slide that says,
I'm kind of, yeah, there. Now it just came back. Thank you.
Okay.
I was kind of looking off two screens. My apologies. Yeah, as a follow-up, since that meeting, Deputy Fire Marshal Panos, who is actually here on, I believe on Zoom, provided acceptable reference for all amendments with the intent to explain each amendment and answer such questions as, where did this amendment come from? Did the fire district write it, or was it modified from the original code language? Why was it written? What's the purpose? What does it serve? Does it make the fire district ordinance more restrictive than the fire code? Does it affect development or building, or does it affect the building industry, or is it just an administrative in nature? Next slide, please. The areas of concern expressed by council were limited to and resulted in non-substantive changes. And pretty much how that worked was went through all of the changes and went through the video, and we found the ones that were most concerned to the council. The one was, and I'll go through them now, open burning. It is not going to be changed. It's for backyard activity such as fire pit or barbecue. Composting would be unchanged for residential backyards as it relates to large-scale commercial activity and agricultural businesses. Thresholds regulating assembly, which would be based on occupancy, unchanged as business activities are regularly performed and verified through an annual inspection, which has been required of all businesses. Rewrite of the state fire code didn't occur. Only select areas were identified with justified amendments based upon geographic constraints, which are common since we're such a large state. Right to enter would only during an instance where there is an egregious hazard. Emergency entry occurs with strict unilateral coordination with the City of Grand Terrace and the San Bernardino County Sheriff. And the right to change fees and amounts, that's adopted by resolution consistent with state code. Next slide, please. Regarding the results, the proposed changes creates uniformity and consistency throughout all of San Bernardino County and its member cities within the Fire Protection District. These non-substantive revisions protect our best interests and protect personal privacy. Next slide. In the future, staff will ensure any future directed changes by council will be communicated to San Bernardino County Fire for their consideration at least 60 days prior to their final document being adopted by their board. Next slide. As a recommendation, staff recommends that the council set a public hearing date for May 12th, 2020 to hear input from the public prior to the proposed reading and adoption of the 2019 Fire Code with local amendments. Before you is the resolution ratifying the County Fire District Board's adoption of the 2019 Fire Code with local amendments for enforcement within the city of Grand Terrace, delegating enforcement authority of the Fire Code to the Chief of the San Bernardino County Fire Protection District, and setting a public hearing prior to second reading and adoption by reference of the 2019 Fire Code with local amendments. Next slide, please. Staff recommends that the council also direct the city attorney to read the title of, waive further reading of, and introduce the ordinance entitled. And if the city attorney could read this, please.
I'll read it after the motion is made, but you could just say, direct the city attorney to read the ordinance, the title of.
Okay, direct the city attorney to read it. Next slide, please. And that does conclude staff presentation. Myself and Adam Panos are here should you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Weiss. Are there any questions of staff at this time? Mayor Pro Tem
Yeah.
Wilson?
Thank you. I've already had an initial discussion with the city manager about this, and he's in the process of looking into it. But I think it's important for us to distinguish how we view cost recovery versus actual benefit realization. For example, fines. Fines are not cost recovery. In most cases, they are just flat fines. And if a fine is inflicted by the county, where does the money go? Because these people live in the city of Grand Terrace, and with that understanding, those funds should be directed to the city of Grand Terrace, unless there is an aspect of cost recovery built in. The other question I had was about an arbiter. At this juncture, the agreement is written in such a way as to placate non-incorporated areas of the county. We're not that. There's a distinct difference between the character of the people that live in the city of Grand Terrace and non-incorporated county people. And so I'd like to find out where our citizens go to get through the quote unquote hearing process. Because it's been my experience through time that a hearing officer is a waste of money. Usually it just echoes whatever is happening with the county officers. And so we need to understand if our folks have an opportunity then to appeal to the city council, or are they going to go to the board of supervisors? It's a little bit of a sticky wicket. So if I was to give my support for this, which I understand is partially a rubber stamp, it's with the proviso that we do straighten out these two items.
Thank you. Deputy Fire Marshal
Thank you. That's all I have,
Panos,
Mayor.
do you have answer to those questions at this time?
I can try my best. Good evening, Mayor, council members. Adam Panos, Deputy Fire Marshal with the San Bernardino County Fire Protection District. So if I understand your question correctly, it was kind of a two-parter. You asked about cost recovery, and fines, and then I'll address that first. So I think it's important to establish a differentiation between fees, which are for the purpose of recovering your cost, and fines, as you pointed out, Mayor Pro Tem, they are for, they're punitive in nature. So they don't recover a cost, they they penalize a behavior that is illegal of some kind. So in the ordinance, it contains both. There are fees for services like inspections, but there are also fines for penalties such as for handling illegal fireworks. So we have done that and imposed those penalties and fines throughout the city of Grand Terrace in the past for handling of those fireworks, which is a misdemeanor. And instead of writing them a citation and having them appear in criminal court for a misdemeanor, and they may get fined, but oftentimes our experience is sometimes the case doesn't hold up and it gets dismissed. So what is very effective in our enforcement program is having an administrative penalty. And the administrative penalty for the illegal fireworks is $1,250. And so if someone's written a ticket, a citation, they have to pay it or they can appeal it. The appeals hearing, as you pointed out, is it's not too far from the city. It's in San Bernardino. A hearing officer is appointed. But it's important to note that all that whole process is done by a third-party contractor. And so we use a third-party agency to send those citations to, and they collect, and they also handle the appeals. There's an appeals process that they have to go through, and if they do that, and if there's not enough evidence or something like that, then it does get overturned. If there is evidence, like photos and other evidence, then it gets upheld. So,
Where does the money?
I'm sorry?
That's my question. Where does the money go? If we
The money
convert it
goes-
to a ticket.
Right. Yeah, the money goes,
Okay.
the money's collected by the third-party agency, and whatever is collected after their fees and overhead and their costs, it gets remitted back to us. It goes in a reserve account, and then it pays for that enforcement program that we do, which is within the city as well as other communities in the county.
Okay, well, it's out of our control.
Well, yeah, I mean, the enforcement program is run by us in cooperation with the sheriff. But yeah, that money's collected, and really not all of it's collected, or it takes a long time to get it collected. But
I've had some of community members have experience with your collection agency, and they often do not talk to people there at your department, so they pursue mercilessly the citizens, even though they've gotten something cleared through the department, and they'll just keep increasing the fee. These are the kinds of things that we can't tolerate. It makes for bad feelings, and we have a lot of large lots, still some horse pasture, some rural conditions that are similar to the county, but they live in the city of Grand Terrace. So I don't want to give the impression that we are, because we are contracting out, that we are also just, putting handcuffs on ourselves.
understood.
Because
Yeah.
that's when we put feelings.
If there is an issue with a business owner or some other, type of company that we are issuing a permit, maybe a contractor or something like that, and, the fees are excessive, or they feel they're excessive, or they feel they're unjustified, then you can definitely direct those inquiries to me personally. I can provide you my contact information, and we can look into it. It's possible that we do make errors once in a while, but the fees are developed by a consultant. They're developed using formulas that provide 100% cost recovery, no more, no less. So it offsets the cost of us doing these inspections, which are required by the state laws. So,
Thank you, Mr. Can I then direct my comment to the city manager, Mayor?
Yes.
That it would seem appropriate that we do make sure we get this smoothed up.
Do you understand that, Mr.
I
Duffy?
didn't hear this last.
Can you say that again, Mayor Pro Tem?
What we talked about in relation to the fees versus fines and any money that is not directly cost recovery, I don't care who figures it out. Whether it's a consultant or somebody over in Orange County that couldn't care less about Grand Terrace, I don't care. The bottom line is, though, money should be to our benefit if it's supposed to be.
Yes, we certainly understand
There's
that.
the other
That if the city is engaged in the collection of the process or processing a component of it, then we will examine what our share should be in that particular situation, yes.
And then the other issue about the ARPA.
Yes, and one of the things that Mayor Pro Tem and I talked about was to try to ensure that our citizens don't have to go to an unreasonable distance in order to have their case heard. And so one of the things that I need to find out too from Panos is that what company is it that is processing their tickets and doing the appeals? And then
It's called
Data
I'm
Ticket?
sorry, Data Ticket, yeah.
Yeah. We use
They
this.
do.
We use the same company, so we have a relationship with them. So that'll help us facilitate some solutions to this.
Sure. And I guess if I could just, address one of the comments about, monies being directed to the city. If there were a multi-agency effort or maybe like a contractual agreement where the city was going to provide some staff to kind of like do a task force type of thing for fireworks enforcement or any kind of other inspection programs or anything like that, then we would definitely do that. And then the money's collected, then the city would get the fair share. These are programs in this ordinance. It's exclusive to the fire department doing the enforcement. So because we're the ones expending those costs, that's who's recovering. Those fees come to us, and that's the purpose of it.
Understand.
Right. Further questions for staff? All right. Any requests to speak on this item?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, we'll bring it back to council for further discussion and consideration of a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to move the item.
All right. Got a motion by Councilmember Hussey,
We'll second it.
second by Councilmember Allen. Would the city attorney please read the title?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The title of the ordinance is as follows: An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Grand Terrace, California, adopting by reference the 2019 California Fire Code as amended by San Bernardino County Fire Protection District, ordinance number 20-01, and repealing and replacing Grand Terrace Municipal Code Chapter 15.18 in its entirety to incorporate the new code as amended. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey,
Yes.
Councilmember Robles,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
Aye.
Mayor McNabo.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 11, which is designation of city's agents in applying for reimbursement from the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or Cal OES. That you, Mr. City Manager?
The Assistant City Manager?
All right.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
The staff report before you, as the mayor mentioned, was the designation of the city's agents in applying for reimbursement from Cal OES. This staff report supports goal number 1, ensuring our fiscal viability through the continuous monitoring of expenditure budgets and revenues and to ensure appropriate cost recovery for services rendered. So as City Council is aware, on March 4th, Governor Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency for California due to the COVID-19 virus. On March 10th, the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors proclaimed an existence of an emergency for the same virus. On March 13th, the President proclaimed a nationwide emergency declaration. After that, the City Manager on the 18th, March 18th, also declared an emergency, local emergency for the city. The day after, Governor Newsom issued Executive Order N3320 with stay-at-home orders and temporary closure of non-businesses. On the 24th, the city ratified the City Manager's emergency declaration. Now, as a result of the President's declaration, local governments are eligible to seek reimbursements from FEMA through Cal OES. Now, they had 3 requirements for us to be eligible. To submit a request for public assistance. This is FEMA's official application form. At the time when this all came out, the deadline was April 17th. So I completed that portion of the form, and we did meet that April 17th deadline. They also needed, Cal OES now needed a project assurances for federal assistance form, which we also submitted online. Now, the third part that is required is that we need a resolution from City Council accompanied. This form designates the city employees who are authorized to actually submit the request for public assistance to Cal OES. So at this time, we are requesting that the 3 positions be authorized to submit request for public assistance and seek reimbursement are the city manager, the assistant city manager, or the principal accountant. There is no fiscal impact to adopting this resolution. And I forgot to add that they did extend the April 17th deadline, but at least we were able to submit 2 out of 3. So as soon as we get this resolution approved, designating these 3 positions, we will go ahead and be submitting this to Cal OES. That concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions City Council may have.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Fortune. Mayor Pro Tem, did you have questions?
No.
Any questions of staff? Any requests to speak on this item?
No, Madam Mayor.
All right, we'll bring it back to council for consideration of a motion.
Mayor, I'll move the adoption of the resolution.
I'll second.
Motion by Councilmember Allen, second by Councilmember Robles. Please call the vote.
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey,
Yes.
Councilmember Robles,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
Aye.
Mayor McNamara.
Yes,
Motion passes unanimously.
thank you. All right, we will move to item 13, which is
Mayor, could we have a break? My bladder is on a 2-hour clock.
all right, we'll go for a 5-minute break. We will reconvene to open session. Thank you very much, Councilmember Robles. I appreciated the break. So we will start with item 13, which is the discussion of potential budget impacts associated with the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. Authorization to use $450,000 of general fund reserves to aid in the current fiscal year deficit, and consideration of a declaration of fiscal emergency. Assistant City Manager Cynthia Fortune.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council. As mentioned, tonight we're going to review the budget impacts of the novel coronavirus. Next slide, please. As Mayor mentioned, we are going to review the potential budget impacts of COVID-19. We are requesting the authorization to use $450,000 in general fund reserves. And we are requesting council to consider the adoption of a resolution declaring a fiscal emergency. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that the city manager will be presenting with me, so if he has any additional information to add, he is going to go ahead and just jump in. So this staff report supports goal number one. As you know, we continuously try to monitor our revenues and expenditures, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to skip the next couple of slides because we had mentioned it in the prior, but again, these were all the declarations that were made by the Governor Newsom, the county president, the city manager, and the executive order. And I will repeat again that the executive order that was issued by Governor Newsom, the stay-at-home orders and the closure of non-essential businesses is what has had an impact on the city's revenues. So the League of California Cities did have a board meeting, and it was reported to them that cities in California have to get ready for a $7 billion general revenue shortfall over the next 2 fiscal years. And if the stay-at-home orders extend into summer months, it will grow by so much more. And all cities, regardless of size, of course we are included, are impacted. And the cities most severely impacted are those that have sales tax and hotel tax. Next slide, please. So as they were also reported to the League's board, that over 90% of cities in California are considering cutting or furloughing city staff or decreasing public services or even taking a look at both. And this pandemic is definitely projecting deep impacts into our own core services, our revenue shortfalls and deferred revenues. So it's not only the fact that we're decreasing in revenues, we're also looking at there are so many revenues that may be delayed as a result of this pandemic. So what the League was telling the board is that given all of this, cities will need some fiscal assistance. And I believe this is where the League is going to come in. They are going to, on behalf of the cities, seek some assistance with the state of California or the feds. The next slide, please. Okay, so right now, our first one is to look at our year-end projection. And next slide, please. So what we had done was take into consideration certain things. And we're looking at this point only fiscal year 2019-20. This is the current year. Again, property taxes, including RPTTF together, total 3.4 million. This current year, our property tax base was 3.1, but we knew we were defeasing the bonds. We knew we were going to get it in prior to October, and we knew that we were going to get at least half of that because of when we were going to submit this. So the defeasement, actually, we started in August. By September, we were done. So it made it to the county. What we were expecting was that whole distribution of 250 in January. Unfortunately, when we got that, and we normally get it December, it was just a little delayed, but when we got it, we only got 100,000 of that 250. But I'm being optimistic that I am thinking that our June allocation will have that remaining 150 because we projected 250 this year. So next year, if we had that complete 500 on top of our base of 3.1, our property tax base should be 3.6 million. That should be had we assumed we are going to get all of it. I am again being very, very conservative. I am assuming that some of our commercial businesses would not be able to pay their taxes, might be delayed, might ask for an extension. So what I did was assume 10% of that we will not receive next year's. So my 2021 projection totaled only 3.3. But I wanted to explain that because just to make sure, and since this is our biggest tax revenue in general fund, that city council understood how we made the projections. Next slide, please. So these are the rest. Now, franchise fees, all that is a delay, except not knowing how far that delay is going to be. We were projecting a 97,000 delay. if it's 120 days, if it's going to be more than that. Now, our licenses, fees, and permits, and our number 5, charges for services. These are all dependent on economic development activity, the bulk of them. So with reviewing with the Public Works Director and the Planning and Development Services Director, we are assuming that we are going to suffer those losses between now and the end of June.
Ms. Fortune, if I could also jump in here on item number 2 for franchise fees.
Yes.
One of the things to also note is that franchise fees are also based upon consumption. And also, people may not be paying their cable bills and so on, or getting delays. And so we may, as you said, may a delay or through some consumption issues may see that may contribute to that $97,000 that we have listed there.
Okay, so number 4, sales tax. Again, we did our own projection and we also listened to the league. What the league is saying is the first quarter of the calendar year, January, February, and March, expect a 30% decrease in your sales tax revenue, and April, May, and June expect a 40% decrease. So for us, that equated to $185,000 in sales tax revenue. And again, charges for services is similar to licenses, fees, and permits. And these two, the bulk of these revenues, we would normally receive April, May, and June. Because when I provided the 6-month actuals for December, these are the two categories that we don't have very much of. It normally happens in the spring and the summer. Next slide, please. So again, with fines and forfeitures, the bulk of this is our citations, our code enforcement. We have since stopped that, so we are expecting a 20,000 decrease. And miscellaneous revenues of 15,000, we barely got any as of December. It is a minimal amount, so we will assume we are not going to receive any more at this time. So based on all of that and the departments continuing to exercise cost-saving measures, we're also projecting 108,000 in expenditure savings. So with that, next slide, please. This is just a monthly year-end projection that I wanted just council to have an idea versus just giving them, one figure so they could see when certain revenues come in and when certain expenditures go out. Next slide, please. So this is our cumulative revenue and expense chart. So the red is our expenditures. As you can see, it is a steady rise, and the blue is our projection. So the first 6 months are actual, and if you look between in January, that's where they meet. So meaning we don't have revenues, we get our big collection in December, that's our property tax, it meets, and then it's slowly. Now the dotted line in yellow, that's where our regular revenues would come in had the pandemic not occur. And as you can see, by the end of the year, we're going to be a little over our expenditures. Unfortunately, based on everything that we have previously discussed, the remaining blue line is what we expect. And projecting that 545 deficit. Next slide, please. So this slide just, again, gives City Council an idea of when we receive our revenues and our expenditures. As you can see with the expenditures, the two big bumps happen in December and June, the bulk of which is our property taxes, and that includes our RPTTF. Next slide, please. So then when we went to our 2021 projection, please continue, next slide. The three main things, the way we propose this, if we did nothing and we carried our existing expenditure base of 5.8, the other things we needed to consider were these increases. So the Sheriff Department submitted their proposed increase of 136,000. I believe was received by the City Manager's office. of which the contract will definitely go before city council for approval. And I believe city manager would like to add to this. He has already started to try to take some cost-cutting measures.
Well,
Sir?
just in terms of the process, that did send a letter to the sheriff's, to the sheriff regarding the increase and asked for a delay or find another way for resources for that. I did copy the council on that, and we have had discussions with the other city managers throughout the region regarding that same issue.
Okay, now our second one is increase in the CalPERS unfunded accrued liability. So our unfunded accrued liability is roughly currently about $450,000, 150 that was carried by the child care. And they have carried that for several years. 1920 is the last year, after which we would have exhausted any proceeds we have from the sale of that building. So next year, child care's 150 portion of the accrued liability has to be borne by the general fund, including the 30,000 increase that CalPERS has on their schedule. And normally what we have been doing is paying this at the first of the year. Because if we don't, CalPERS will charge us that 7% discount rate if we do it on monthly payments. So paying it on July 1st versus paying it in 12 monthly installments saves us about $13,000. Now we have, if City Council will recall in 2018, we had purchased the Springfield property, and we had come up with an agreement with the wastewater fund to borrow that money, and the first annual debt service payment is due to the wastewater fund come July 1st. So these are all the additional increases that we would need to look at and consider when we develop our 2021 budget. Next slide, please. So based on that, again, this is just a 12-month projected scenario, and it's a very, it's a preliminary projection. I just wanted council to be aware of that. We will still continue to vet this to make sure that it is correct. Can we, next slide, please? So what I wanted to bring about, again, this again just only shows revenue and expense projections. So what I put at the bottom is a cash flow. I did this on all the charts. We start with a zero, and we put in the revenue and the expense. So on a normal year, come December or January, that bottom should have been zero. But based on what we are looking here, yeah, it's already a negative. If you look at January, yeah, the ending balance is a negative 700, and that just increases to 1.1. Next slide, please. So this then shows just that cumulative, so our total projected expenditures, again, including those three big categories or items, 6.3 million against a revenue of 5.1, almost 5.2. Next slide, please. So for scenario 2, we were assuming this would be the worst, okay, that all I did was a 25% across the board, meaning if we literally did not receive 3 months of our revenue, what would that be? Yeah, so next slide, please. And again, same items plus only 75% of our revenue. Next item, please. Same projected scenario, and if we can go to the next slide. So again, because of that, based on this, if we were really only to get 75% of all our revenue, it is just a much bigger deficit. Next slide, please. And again, as shown by this cumulative revenue and expense projection, because now the revenue is under 5 million, 4.48, against now a projected expenditure of possibly 6.3. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we just, again, I pulled this from the league. These are the impacts to public services. And for the cities that are under 25,000, because that's where we are, they are looking at 84% of cities under 25,000 are going to cut or decrease public services. Next slide, please. And on that same, of that 25%, 71% are anticipating furloughs or layoffs. And that is going to be actually a staggering impact on all city workforce. Next slide, please. So to summarize, as City Council is aware, COVID-19 has really had a severe impact on the city's fiscal viability. It is something that I personally have no control over. And again, these are projections to the best of our ability. The city manager and I even looked at our 10-year history month at a time just to really see where we could be as optimistic as we can be. And I have to say the city manager is much more optimistic than I am. I am the conservative finance director. I am really trying to look at the city's best interest. So the city manager, we will be returning, should this be approved, to City Council for approval with recommendations and cost-saving measures to mitigate further impact to general fund reserves. And we are definitely wanting council to know that this may include reductions in personal costs and service levels. And next slide, please. I believe. So again, as mentioned earlier, we do have 3 recommendations to review and approve the update of the fiscal impacts of COVID-19 to both the 2019-20 and 2020-21 budgets. Authorize the use of up to $450,000 in general fund reserves to help offset this deficit. And again, it is up to, and I'm sure the city manager can add, we may not necessarily have to use it all. You know, we may come up with other cost-saving measures for this year and next year, but we're going to definitely try to reduce the impact to the fund balance and to consider the adoption of a resolution declaring a fiscal emergency due to COVID-19. And yes, I believe I was also asked, our current operating, and I say that, our current operating fund balance is right around 900,000. Although our CAFR shows a fund balance of over 3 million, 2 million and change in that are in excess revenue bonds. So, and again, we are going to look at all costs, all savings, and see what we can do to, again, mitigate as much as we can from the general fund reserves. Next slide, please. I believe this is the end of our report. Yeah, my report. The city manager might have more to add to this, if you would like to. If not, city manager and I will be happy to answer any questions city council may have.
Yes, Ms. Fortune, just for the record, that I did receive an email from Councilmember Robles, and she had a series of questions that I think your presentation might have answered, but there were a couple more that I just wanted to go by just to make sure that those were clear, and before we actually start any questions or discussions from the council. One of the questions that was asked is what would giving the authority to use reserves up to $450,000 accomplish, other than to keep current operations without cuts? Did we sufficiently answer that question in the presentation, or should I add some more information?
Well, I mean, I'm looking at the city of Monterey. They're meeting tonight, and they're already proposing 83 real cuts in positions, 100 and some that are budgeted authority ones. And so I'm just wondering why we're here talking about giving you authority for 450 to offset something when I'd be more looking for from the base up.
Sure.
Recommendations.
Sure. And so what we're talking about here tonight are 2 scenarios. One is COVID-19 into this fiscal year, but the actions that you take tonight will also, the actions that we're proposing tonight will also help for the new fiscal year. So there's 2 distinct issues here. We have 2 months left in this fiscal year, and so we have to try to balance this year's budget. And then we also have the next fiscal year. And so, for example, any proposed cuts or layoffs that would be made later on, they would also have a significant impact because you'd have a whole year's worth of savings and versus 2 months right now. So the first component of this discussion was the need for $450,000 to really impact the 4 months that we have been impacted so far. And so the 450, as the staff report says, it's an up to dollar amount. So it's not just a request for the council to give us the authorization for $450 out of the fund balance, but we would also come back with you with other cuts that we would make that would result in less use of the fund balance.
But in response to that, you're looking at this year about $97,000 only in additional cuts?
No, we're looking at, well, it's 2 months' worth. And so, for example, we'd be looking at COVID-19 community development block grant funding. That's $100,000 coming in that we got out of the CARES Act. We'd also be looking at trying to savings in contract services and some salary savings, yes.
Well, yeah, so my question is, we have $900,000 fund balance. So two, if we approve two, we don't have to approve 1, 2, and 3. We can just do 3. Having you come back with us with revised cuts. I'm just, because once we authorize up to $450,000, we're taking $450,000 away from the policy discussion.
You can certainly do 3 by itself, and that'll bring us right back here within the next week to talk about how we're going with the strategy that we're going to use. One of the things in terms of developing the strategy is we'll come back and show you the cuts that we've made or that we're recommending to you, and then you'll be able to see what that dollar amount should look like. Now remember, these are projections. And so while we're going to come back with you with what our best guesses are in terms of the projections based on the data, ultimately in the end, we're going to have to do a true up at the end of the year, and that's going to be a number. If you authorize us to have the maximum of up to 450, when we come back to you in the next week or so, we're going to show you what those other cuts are. And then you can look at that projection, and then you can make that determination on how to proceed. So you're right. If we delayed this, just did action 3, we'd still be right back here next week having the same discussion about the $450,000 use.
Yeah, but I would prefer it that way. This is, I would have thought that we would have had a special meeting, or we're going to have a special meeting because payroll keeps going. So payroll, if you combine, if we, police that we have and is always about 85% of a budget. So unless we're talking about some kind of cuts to payroll, it's going to be very difficult to balance. But it's up to, of course, the council. If they want to say that there's 900,000 and we're just going to lop off 450,000, they can certainly do that. I can't support that.
Yeah, and so one of the things I want to make clear here in terms of the authorization to use $450,000. That is the authorization to use it to put as a part of our overall projection. We would still be going through the process to come back to the council with additional cuts, but we are not just taking $450,000 and spending it. We're getting the authorization if we need to be able to tap into that resource.
Well, I have a question for the city attorney. If we authorize $450,000, that's an authorization, a budget authority, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, so we're bestowing the budget authority $450,000 without knowing what that is.
The council could always put restrictions on it, put conditions on it, such as you only use it for if you need it, and provide feedback to the council before doing so, but at least he can budget that 450 or use it, or project to use it if necessary.
Okay, so I'm going to not talk anymore so others can participate.
Okay,
What also, Mayor, how much more I want to add, the city manager's authority to spend money is limited to $10,000. And so I wouldn't have the authority to take the rest of the $450,000 and do anything with it without coming back to the council.
okay. So I saw a hand raised by Bill Hussey, but I also see that Mayor Pro Tem had his mute off for a little bit. So I'm going to go Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Hussey.
I need to ask this question even at this time frame, and that is, we hear rumors that, in fact, at the state level, about bankruptcy declarations. Is that something that we should be looking at with about 6 months worth of lead time?
No, absolutely not. I want to make it very clear, that is you probably don't even qualify for bankruptcy at this time. And that's not a discussion that the council should be having, because that sends the wrong signal to your potential investors. And so it's very important to understand the council has about $9 million in cash that they could do some internal borrowing on as another remedy. There are other options that are available, and bankruptcy isn't a word that should be echoed in this chambers.
Understood.
Councilmember.
That to me, that draws a hard line.
Councilmember Hussey?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, a couple questions and probably a statement on it too. On our sales tax revenue, I know some of the businesses modified and are still making some money. And out of those businesses that are shut down, were any of those the top 25% producers for our tax revenue for the city?
So there were some businesses that are in that top 20 that modified their services. But the good thing to say is that of the grocery stores and HVAC plumbing manufacturers, those are top generators, and they have not shut their doors. The question really becomes, what is the impact? And as the league has said repeatedly, there are this situation impacts different organizations differently. And so for us, our top sales tax generators are fast food restaurants, grocery stores, and a couple HVAC suppliers. And so the real question becomes, what does that real number look like in terms of sales tax? When we find out what that is, that'll also project that'll have a significant impact on our projections for the next fiscal year. Our assumption is that this last quarter should be the most significant impact to our revenues. And as Ms. Fortune had the slide earlier, if this stay-at-home order stays in place beyond June 30th, we're going to have another significant impact. But based upon the data that we can get for these last 4 months of the fiscal year, that's going to tell us a lot, and that's going to also be able to adjust what that 450 number really looks like when you get toward June. So, Councilman Hussey, you're right on point in terms of our top 20 sales tax generators may not be impacted as much as other organizations are. Certainly, if we had a TOT tax, like some other cities have, they're really hurting in that particular area.
Okay, well, thank you. And my second question, it goes with Councilmember Robles. It's kind of a statement too. I'm very hard to decline, just because we all of a sudden we have a little hiccup, we're going to break the piggy bank and get our reserve when it took so long to get the reserves. But I understand how you want to have it sorted in the budget if you want to keep our city going. But, we just started this pandemic and this emergency, and I think we're kind of jumping the gun also and look at our reserves when we could have other avenues to approach this, because the way everything's going, and you just had it on the overhead, that it's going to probably be worse in a couple of years, and we're going to need our reserves in a couple of years from now. So can we And then I know, Mr. Duffy, you said, you're not authorized to spend more than 10,000. I mean, can we do a budget, what Irene thinking we have the reserves and get back with us, and then have the budget with reserves, because I'm really hard to say, just go ahead and put the 450,000 up there and say, okay, everything's good. That'd be like me, losing my job and I'm just gonna go use the credit card and everything's still gonna be the same instead of tightening my belt.
So, Councilman Hussey, while I am very optimistic about our future and the way to move forward, I can say with some certainty that we will have to use some portion of our general fund reserve or cut severely, because the revenues that we have will not match our expenditures. So we can cut and cut very deeply on a budget that's already been expended for 10 months. And our challenge right now is to balance, misfortune doesn't want to use balance when you use reserves, so is to finish out the year utilizing as little as the rainy day fund as possible. But I have to be a realist that either it's much deeper cuts or there's some use of the rainy day fund. Now, I can understand Councilperson Robles' comments, and we can come back with a much tighter number that will tell you that it's not 450, but whatever the other number is. But it's going to be a number.
Well, I understand it's gonna be a number. I mean, that's why we have our reserve fund there, just, 450, that's half of what, we're going. And just like that story about the man who put his finger in the dike to keep the flood from going, and next thing you know, we had other, leaks and everything, I mean, we see it coming. I mean, it's gonna have a domino effect, and, we're gonna, put a little Band-Aid on it now, or go ahead and take care of the main problem, because later on we keep putting Band-Aids and Band-Aids, and then our reserve goes down to nothing. But I understand, Mr. Duffy, I'm just concerned about that's a significant amount that they're asking out of our reserves to try to balance this rest of the year budget.
Absolutely, and I think that very consistent with the fiscal stewards, the hawks that we have here, I would expect these questions to be asked.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Allen? Well, you haven't answered it. You haven't asked your questions yet. We'll come back around.
Right, all right. I wanted to make sure I'm clear on Councilmember Robles' concerns, and also that I'm clear on Mr. Duffy's explanations on, using this. So I just want to make sure I understand it right, that us authorizing it doesn't mean you can use it. You still have to come back to us and tell us how you're going to use it.
That is correct. My goal would to be back here within the week to come up with, show you with a plan on how we're expecting to use it. And there are some other things that we have to also look at too. For example, we will factor in things like, well, is there going to be FEMA reimbursements? What does that look like? Now, here again, that is a possibility. And so we plug that in and say, oh, we may not need 450 because we have this possibility. We'll look at the COVID-19 community development block grants and say, okay, and there's $100,000 there. Now, we are earmarked to get that money, but you have to apply for it, and when is it going to hit? And so we can certainly bring all that back, but if you authorize us tonight to have the authority to use the $450,000, we're not going to, within the next week, spend any of that. We'll come back to the council. But if that's, it's really up to the council to make that decision. It's not an issue for us.
Okay, but your concern is taking half of the reserves that we may need it more desperately in a future date. Is that correct?
That, and also and this is a style of how things have been presented to us by the city manager before. He wants authority, and it's a blank amount of money, and then he comes back incrementally, okay? And we forget what the big picture is. So why would you need 450,000 when you haven't presented a plan to us yet? You shouldn't need it.
Can I ask a further question on that
Yeah.
point? What restriction do you have that keeps you from coming back with a plan that shows if we don't have authority for budget, for the 450,000, and if we do have authority? And are you precluded from projecting as though you would have the authority, even though you don't have it? I mean, so I think that's the confusion too, is that I'm hearing from Councilmember Robles, and I have too, is in order to make the projection and to say what cuts you'd have, why is it necessary to have this step at this point? Couldn't you ask for that authority when you come back?
Oh, we certainly can.
Okay.
Ask for that when we come back. And here's the thing, so if I didn't come back here tonight,
Right.
we still have the authority to you adopted a budget
Right.
of $5.8 million.
Sure.
And so if we do nothing, at the end of June 30th, you will have spent $5.8 million because of the authority that you already gave. We are here right now to say to the council that we're not going to get that revenue. And so, and as I said, item number 2, it doesn't matter if it happens today or it happens next week. We can come back for that. But I want to be very clear, the authority that we have to spend $5.8 million has already been given to the city manager in your budget. My responsibility is to come back here, not in piecemeal fashion, but to come back here to say to you, we're not going to make our revenue projections. And so we're saying that we may need to use up to $450,000. Now, if that is all that the council wants to hear tonight, that's great. And then we can come back with you with the actual plan on reducing that. But the goal tonight is to let the council know that you adopted a budget of $5.8 million and your revenue isn't there. And that's the first step, and that's the reason why we're here.
Okay. I have a couple more questions. One of them being, what you're asking for is a declaration of fiscal emergency. What does that get us by declaring that? What does that action do for you?
So what that does for me is that allows me to bring a plan back for you to be able to make some recommendations on some personnel cuts, and also to be able to use the fund balance.
Okay, and so if you don't have that declaration of fiscal emergency, could you still come back to us next week?
Assuming that we
Mr. City
could, I would
Attorney?
ask the city attorney that.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And then if there is a declaration of fiscal emergency, how long does it last? And when, and how do we officially declare it over?
So it's a great question, because as you recall, the council approved a declaration of emergency a few weeks ago. That is governed by our code and somewhat by state law as well, where there are provisions where it has to come back, I believe, within 60 days. And I think the governor in this case has removed that requirement. In this case, this fiscal emergency is not really dictated by any state law. So there's no absolute requirement that you have to come back within a certain period. You could put a certain time limit if you'd like. The only time that I have seen a fiscal emergency is where a city wants to place a tax on a special election. And because you normally put like a general tax on a general election, but some cities, because of a quote-unquote fiscal emergency, need to do it sooner and put it as a special election. In that case, the council has to unanimously approve. quote-unquote, the fiscal emergency.
And so that was done in this city, but we never came back and said, okay, we are declaring that we are no longer in a fiscal emergency. Does that mean that we are continuously in a state of emergency since that declaration?
When was that?
2013.
I guess theoretically, yes. I mean, that's
I mean,
interesting.
so we would have needed to come back and say, we are officially not in a state of emergency?
It probably would be a good idea to close the loop.
So
in my-
at this point, we currently are in a state of fiscal emergency?
I guess so. But I think it would make sense to,
Okay.
in this case, reaffirm it, I guess. And maybe we do come back with a resolution closing that other one.
Okay. And I have a question about the wastewater fund money that we borrowed. That was, that's something that we would pay back when the Greens Group escrow is closed?
That is correct.
Okay. So, Councilmember Robles, did you have another question?
Well, this is a discussion, right? So,
Actually, we're doing questions, and then we'll have, I don't know if there's any public comment, but then we'll come back for
okay,
discussion.
so
questions at this point.
a fiscal emergency, this would be to put a tax measure on should the budget fall apart.
That would be an option for the council.
But otherwise, there is no other reason to put a declaration of fiscal emergency unless you want 4/5 vote to recommend a tax measure.
Well, so let me be clear, my determination of a fiscal emergency, whether it is, this is a fiscal emergency from my perspective. Anytime your economy shut down and your revenues are falling short, and so maybe in a sense, when I say fiscal emergency, that's my way of saying to you, we need to look at the rainy day fund. Well, I know very clearly that if you establish a fiscal emergency, that one of the tools the council might have is to put a tax measure on. That's not my overall goal. My goal was to bring the issue to the council and say, this is a significant issue. Mm-hmm. If I didn't do it, that would be a significant issue.
Now, City Attorney, you don't need to declare a fiscal emergency to implement budget cuts, correct?
That is correct.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson. Please unmute. Mayor Pro Tem, we're not hearing you. Can we unmute Mayor Pro Tem?
Why that happened. But anyway, on the fiscal emergency, is it not considered a legal term? And isn't it possible that there might be some prefaces in relation to receiving funds? My thought is that first of all, when we've declared a fiscal emergency before, it had to do with the city manager understanding that there were stops. There were stops on any expenses that were being spent past a certain amount. There were, cuts. There were a whole bunch of things that kind of went into play based on that fiscal emergency. Right now, we don't have anything. We have something called COVID, or whatever it is, COVID-19. But we don't have any link to the fiscal emergency that it is causing. And, the feds and the state guys have already acknowledged that. Why would we not continue with the game plan and then form our game plan behind that declaration? In other words, justifying these things. We always, when we go to do a resolution, we always, based on this, based on this, based on this, the action is being taken. So that's my thought pattern is that it's a legal term that we can back up against, not, well, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's a little bit too goosey-goosey.
All right, so if we declare fiscal emergency, does that help us in applying for FEMA relief?
I can't say whether it does. I can check that out. The fiscal emergency to me is having this conversation with you guys to understand that the budget that you approved has been significantly modified because of COVID-19.
Okay. Any further questions at this time? Councilmember Allen.
So if you come back to us in a week or whenever you do, a couple of the other things that were brought up earlier in the meeting, the upcoming costs for the sheriff's contract and the increase, and then the wastewater debt and, that slide. And so will declaring a physical emergency give us any extra support for an argument that we have in your request for the sheriff's department to not raise the fees annually, or for any other contract or debt that we have?
Well, part of the discussion has to occur like this, is do you have a fiscal emergency? How do you have a fiscal emergency? How are you in financial constraints when you have a rainy day fund of $900,000? And so everybody who operates, who looks at and works with you, are going to be saying to you, you don't have a fiscal emergency. You've got $900,000 and you can spend it any time that you want. Every labor issue, every contractor, every city, every sheriff's department said, well, you don't have an issue because you have $900,000 that you're not committed to. And so if we do nothing and we move forward to the end of the fiscal year, you have a budget that says you have $5.8 million and you have $900,000 in a reserve that's still sitting there. And by after this meeting that you are not going to make your budget numbers. And so by allocating some of that money from the reserve, you're trying to balance out the year. And so will the sheriff see us? Yeah, we definitely have issues, and it becomes more prevalent in the new fiscal year because now you have a whole 12 months to look at versus 2 months that you're trying to balance out this year. So certainly declaring a fiscal emergency might have some benefits in terms of how people see your position. But as long as you've got a rainy day fund that's supposed to help you when you have issues like this, people are going to want you to go to that source first.
So we were talking earlier about furloughs versus layoffs, and one of the things was there, I don't recall, but was reduction in pay up there also as an option? Cuts, not to avoid layoffs or avoid furloughs.
So that would be a part of the plan that I would bring back to the council. It would be a combination of cost savings, and then what I can't do for that, we'd fill in with the rainy day fund.
Mr. City Attorney.
Yes. One other point I'd like to note, as I stated, there's no requirement under state law that we quote unquote declare a fiscal emergency to take care of any objective. But there is one benefit to doing so, and that is you're creating a record. As Mr. Duffy was saying, if we ever have to take any actions, you're creating a record, and the resolution would document your findings and the evidence that you had to declare it. The one area that it could come in handy, it's not a statute, but it's case law, where a public agency has to impair or basically get out of a contractual obligation. So the fact that you have a resolution documenting all your findings, that could be helpful in that case. So just want to throw that in.
Thank you. Councilmember Hussey, you had a question?
Are we at question or statements yet?
Question.
Okay, I have I guess the question is,
We can come back for discussion in a minute if you want.
yeah, it's a discussion and question, so I'd rather wait. So.
Okay. So if there are no further questions at this time, I will ask if there are any members of the public wishing to speak on this item.
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So then we'll come back and we'll have discussion and determine how we want to move forward on this item. So go ahead, Councilmember Hussey.
Okay, so part of the discussion is, there's a question. If our balanced budget, we approved a budget for 5.3 million this year, I believe, or 5.8. And we have 2 months to go on that. And the city manager wants to have it in his, let's say, deck of cards at 450,000 if we authorize him to use it to balance the budget that we approved. Now, being a steward of the money here and council member, you know, like everybody else, and I'm sure the residents want to know, you know, because they did the same thing, that they just say that they can't take that vacation now because they got laid off or furloughed, so they're going to live within their means, and they expect us to live within our means. So living within our means means finding what we can cut before we dipped into our savings, and that's what most people do. And I know city government, every government, it's weird how we do our budget. Everything's on perspective. We prospect to get this, we project, you know, get that, but we don't take in perspective on what might happen, what pandemic, what national disaster. That's why we have a rainy day fund for that. I think, yeah, this is a sort of a disaster, but it's not a bad disaster because we're only 2 months out, and I just don't foresee using the whole 450 or given authorization to use the whole 450. I think we should come back and see exactly what dollar amount is needed. Like we said, we do need that fund. So that's my thing. I go, can we go and, you know, as a council member, Mr. Duffy presents it to us to do the cuts on the budget, what we're going to have for the rest of this year.
He was wondering if you could come back with cuts for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. That would be the first thing that we would do when we come back next week.
Because that's why I want to know, like Councilmember Robles, I want to know exactly what bottom line that you would need that rainy day fund. I don't want to, I don't feel comfortable giving a blank check for 450, even though you can't use it, Mr. Duffy. I would just like to know and pinpoint and do what we all wanted to get elected for, to take care of our city and our residents and spend our money wisely for our future residents, for our kids, so we're just not putting a debt burden on them. So I would just like to pinpoint exactly how much more we need to keep the city going for this budget, and then also go into the next fiscal budget. And then if we do get money back, I mean, we bring back little programs, or we bring back other things that we have, or, you know, go ahead and take care of our wish list. That's just my opinion.
Councilmember Robles and then Councilmember Allen.
Yeah, you know, I think it's very disrespectful to my role to say, when I say I don't want to give a blank check of 450,000, and then you say, well, you authorize the budget, so you have cuts, and, you know, like we're not doing our job. What we're saying is, to do our job and to be respectful to citizens who are losing their jobs or having cuts in services, we need to start with a scenario that doesn't have any abatements of reserves. And this, by saying not authorizing your use for 450,000, doesn't stop you from coming with recommendations. We're not saying that we're going to go in and spend $5.8 million that we allocated in the budget before this pandemic happened. We go around in circles, and we've done this before. You want a blank check for residual RDA money, and I can't spend it, and then you come back piecemeal, and we lose the global picture. So only thing I can support is we need to start with some cuts. I personally don't think our property taxes are our main revenue source. And we increased our property taxes by defeasing RDA bonds. So we are in a better condition than most cities would be because a basic foundation of our budget was enhanced. Sales tax, I think, you know, if it's fast food and groceries in this town, I don't see how we're going to be that impacted. But I do know from being in doing county budgets during different economic downturns, and from the theory of getting a master's in public administration is that, it pains me to say this because this is my employees' lives, but the only way to balance a budget is to have cuts to salaries and benefits. So what I'd like to see is that we don't have any fund balance used the cart before the horse. You can come back and you can say, here's different scenarios, we cut everybody across the board, 20%, 10%, 30%, a mixture of both, what professional services we can live with or without. And if it's too difficult for what we feel is appropriate, then we can incrementally give you some fund balance. But I'm not willing to give you fund balance and then get a plan.
Councilmember Allen?
Well, I don't think we ought to do anything piecemeal because we were just complaining, and you were just saying how he comes back piecemeal, so
I didn't
what
say
I want to
piecemeal,
say
you
is,
misunderstand me.
I've been a council member for 18 months, and I sat on the planning commission for 5 years before that, and to this day, I cannot find any reason to doubt or not trust the city manager's word on anything he says. He's never, ever led us astray. He led us out of a fiscal crisis, and he, along with our assistant city manager and their staff, put us on a fairly sound fiscal footing.
I would like you to respect my opinion and my viewpoint.
I absolutely do.
I've been on the
absolutely
council
do
since
respect it.
2012.
But I trust what the city manager is saying about the $450,000. He cannot use it. I think it would be extra work on the staff to put the burden on them to try to come up with what ifs. If we get it, if we don't get this. If you do say we can have the 450, if we don't, because there's double the amount of scenarios they'd have to create.
Not
The
difficult.
physical emergency, item number 3, it seems to me that will just help simplify or move the process along based on the situation we found ourselves in. With all that said, I'd like to make a motion I recommend all 4 of the items on the agenda as recommended by staff. I'd like to move it.
I'll second that. So we have a motion by Councilmember Allen, and I'm seconding the motion. Will you please call roll?
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey,
No.
Councilmember Robles,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
Aye.
Mayor McNabo.
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmember Allen, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson, Mayor McNabo voting yes. Councilmembers Robles and Hussey voted no.
Madam Mayor, may I make one point?
Mr. City Attorney?
Thank you. So the resolution as proposed by staff states that the action is unanimous.
It would have to be unanimous.
Then it would have to be a unanimous vote. So technically, the way it's written, it wouldn't pass.
Correct.
So, however, as I stated earlier, there's no legal requirement, if we're not doing a tax, that it can't pass without the unanimous language. So I would, if the council is acceptable to it, I would ask for a follow-up motion to adopt the resolution, but striking the terms unanimous throughout the resolution. But also, there's a provision in, let me see it, Section 4 of the resolution, which talks about the Article 13C of the California Constitution. That's referencing the sales tax or the tax issue, that language be stricken as well.
Okay.
So in this case, because the item required a unanimous, the way it was written, recommendations 1 and 2 passed, no issue there. With respect to item 3, it doesn't pass as proposed.
The fiscal emergency.
The fiscal emergency. If the council desires to re-adopt it without that language, as I stated, that's fine.
But then again, okay, so this is when I was here and we were doing a Measure C, you had to have 4/5 vote,
Correct.
because the declaration of a fiscal emergency is to, in case you want to put a tax measure.
That's correct.
So this has not been represented the way it is, because to get FEMA money, you don't have to have a fiscal emergency. To get state stimulus money, a federal stimulus money, you don't declare, there's formulas on how that money comes. So this was a backdoor way of saying 4/5 vote for declaration of a fiscal emergency for a tax measure.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson.
It can be used, my question is, can be used to put on a tax measure or has to be used as a tax measure? So in other words, it opens the door, but does it mean that it's defined? So it sounds like to me that the way it's written, the way the law is written, is that it opens the door, but it doesn't have to be that way.
That's correct.
And so, Mr. City Attorney, you were saying part of the resolution would be striking
The
the use of the fiscal emergency for a tax measure.
That
So
is correct.
we would be taking that out. So if we do declare a fiscal emergency,
It would not be
it would not be used for that.
for the tax issue. That is correct.
Okay. Is there anybody wanting to make that motion?
Well, I'm fine making that motion, but what I'd like to do is, if it's okay, before that is ask Councilmember Robles if that is her concern. Is that the concern you have is of the fiscal
I
emergency?
just want people to know what's being presented to you and what the implications are. And I agree with Mayor Pro Tem, it doesn't mean you have to, but everything should be above board what the consequences of our actions are.
Okay, I'm fine. I understand that, and I respect what you're saying there, Councilmember Robles. I couldn't find any reason to not support it, and that's why I made the motion. And I'll make this motion too, as long as we put the caveat in there that declaring a fiscal emergency will not put this be used as a tax. Well, how does it be worded?
So it would take out the word unanimous all the way through, and it would strike the section that this would be used for a tax measure.
Right,
Right.
correct. And as Mayor Pro Tem stated correctly, it leaves the door open. It would have left the door open.
It would have left it.
Now, that being said, there's nothing precluding the city council from coming back in the future and formally declaring a fiscal emergency in accordance with the state constitution for the tax measure. Nothing precluding that at all.
But that's not the purpose of this one.
But that is not the purpose.
And we're declaring that now, yeah.
Well, with the strikes that I've proposed, this resolution would not be used for that purpose.
Right on.
So that's your motion?
That is.
Is there a
Does a
second?
second concur? You were the second, Mayor.
Okay, I'll make a second on that follow-up motion. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Allen,
Yes.
Councilmember Hussey,
Oh, yes on this one.
Councilmember Robles,
No,
Mayor Pro Tem Wilson,
Yes?
Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
Motion passes with Councilmembers Allen, Robles, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson, Mayor McNamara voting yes, Councilmember Hussey voted no.
no.
No, that's not
So
correct.
Robles, no.
Robles,
So
no.
read that again. Robles voted no.
She said,
No.
I apologize. Councilmembers Allen, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson, Mayor McNamara votes yes. Councilmembers Hussey and Robles vote no.
I think Councilmember
Oh,
Hussey voted
Hussey
yes.
voted
Vote
yes.
yes.
Voted yes.
Yes, Hussey voted yes.
On this particular item.
Well, I didn't understand him either, so I'm with you there, City Clerk.
But this particular item still authorizes 450,000?
Well, that was the first vote. The second vote was only for the declaration of emergency, or the change in the resolution for the declaration of emergency.
Well,
Correct?
but to be clear, The other items have already passed.
Right, but the second vote was only to change the resolution and to approve the amended resolution.
But the city attorney said it technically didn't pass unless we struck out the language.
Correct.
That was the second, that was the second vote. That was the second
Yeah,
vote.
that necessitated the second vote.
Okay. Any further questions about what we voted on and how we voted?
I'm clear. So, motion passed with council members Allen, Hussey, Mayor Pro Tem Wilson, Mayor McNichol voting yes, Councilmember Robles votes no.
All right, thank you. Item 12 is the budget development guidelines and budget schedule, and I'm going to ask Mr. City Manager, shouldn't this wait for our next meeting?
It certainly can if we're going to come back for a special meeting next week.
Well, it sounds to me like that was the plan, to come
Yes.
back, and it seems to me that if you're coming back with projections, then it makes more sense for us to talk about budget development guidelines, although that's just my opinion. So my colleagues want to speak about this item at this time, or would you like to do it as part of our special meeting?
I'd like to do it as part of our special meeting.
A special
What-
meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be fine, because I think it'll be a difference between now and then, right?
I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay. So would you like us to, do we need to make a motion for that? Okay, so
No.
we'll move that to our special meeting.
Yep.
All right. So then the next item is city manager communications. Mr. Duffy?
I do not have anything to report, Mayor.
You don't? Okay. So at this time, we will adjourn to our next regular city council meeting, which will be held Tuesday, May 12th, 2020, at 6 p.m. Any request to have an item placed on a future agenda item must be made in writing and submitted to the city clerk's office, and the request will be processed in accordance with council procedures. At this time, we are adjourned.